When the NFL schedule comes out, there are a lot of things that people look for and have valid gripes about. You look to see if you have any 3-game road trips or stretches where you are never at home. You look to see if there are any stretches that could be considered gauntlets, where you're playing the best teams in the league in quick succession. You're looking to see how many opponents you're playing that are coming off of a bye week and therefore are well rested. And you look to see if there's an imbalance there. You're looking at travel things that make no sense, like being an East Coast team and playing a team on the West Coast in weeks 5 and 7, but going back home in week 6 for some reason. You're looking at scheduling issues where you play a team twice in 3 weeks, or don't play a divisional opponent until super late in the season, or things like primetime games. You get the idea. There are a lot of things to complain about with the schedule, and not everyone's going to be happy. It's very hard to please all 32 teams. And there are some complaints and gripes that are completely 100% legitimate. But of all the complaints about a schedule in the history of the NFL, I promise you, there is nothing that is stupider and more nonsensical than the one issued by this man right here. This is Green Bay Packers head coach Dan Devine, and coming off of a 1972 season where he guided the Packers to the playoffs for the first time since 1967, he was handed the schedule for the 1973 season, looking for his Packers to repeat as NFC Central champions. And when he saw the schedule, he immediately criticized the NFL for how unfair and for how nonsensical it was. And when you hear the reason behind why Dan Devine criticized this, I promise you, it's going to blow your mind. Because if you stop to think about it for more than 5 seconds, it truly makes no sense. Because this is the story behind what might just be, considering the circumstances, the dumbest scheduling controversy in the history of the NFL that you've never heard about before. Make sure you hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel. Because we post every single down here about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL with stories like this one. So if you like that sort of stuff and want to join this ever-growing community of football historians, then this is the place for you. Thanks in advance for liking and subscribing, and with that in mind, let's talk about Dan Devine's complaints being anything but divine. Before I talk about the actual incident in question and what exactly Dan Devine was unhappy about, we need some context to talk about how the season was going to end for the Green Bay Packers. It will work best if I spoil the results and explain how each game in this stretch went, so we're sort of going to work backwards when it comes to this. In Week 12, the Packers headed to Milwaukee County Stadium to have a home game against the New Orleans Saints. This was a game where the Packers dominated and won by a final score of 30-10. Green Bay was on the front foot the entire time, leading it wire to wire after scoring the first 13 points of the game. And this was a game where Green Bay was absolutely dominant defensively. The Packers forced 5 turnovers, and they forced the Saints quarterbacks, Archie Manning and Bobby Scott, to combine to go just 18 for 36, completing 50% of their passes with 4 interceptions, 3 sacks, and a combined passer rating of 34.2, which is worse if you did nothing but spike the ball into the ground on every single play. The Saints were one of those opponents that back in the 1970s, you really hope you got on your schedule, because they were never good, and could usually be counted on as an easy win. And sure enough, the Packers drew them and gave their home fans a show to remember. After that, in Week 13, the Packers played a nationally televised Saturday game at home at Lambeau Field against their in-division rival, the Minnesota Vikings. This game didn't go quite as well for the Packers, as in a game that was never even the slightest bit competitive, they lost by a final score of 31-7. Even though the Packers somehow won the division over the Vikings in 1972, by 1973, the talent gulf between the teams was noticeable. One of these teams finished the season in first place with a 12-2 record and an eventual appearance in the Super Bowl, and the other one finished with just 5 wins and nowhere near the playoffs. And it was not hard on this day to tell which one was which. Minnesota led it 14-0 after 1, led it 28-0 at the halftime break, and led it by 5 scores midway through the third quarter, since 31-0 was a 5-score game back in 1973 due to the fact that the 2-point conversion was not a thing in the NFL. Green Bay turned the ball over 5 times and had no answers whatsoever for Chuck Foreman on the ground, as he ran it for over 100 yards on well over 5 yards per carry. This was the last home game of the season for the Packers, and to say that their fans went out on a whimper would be putting it lightly. And then, to end the season, in Week 14, the Packers played another division rival, squaring off against the Chicago Bears on the road at Soldier Field. This time, the Packers took it to a really bad Bears team and dominated, winning it by a final score of 21-0. It was not exactly a good day to be a quarterback. The Packers only completed 3 passes all game and had a completion percentage of 25%. And on the opposite side, Gary Huff for the Chicago Bears completed just 37% of his passes and got sacked 5 times. But the Packers won this one not just because of their defense, which forced 3 turnovers and made Huff stay a living nightmare, but because of their strong ground game. John Brockington and MacArthur Lane each had over 100 yards rushing, with Lane picking up 101 yards, and Brockington, the Pro Bowl running back, picking up 142 yards en route to his second straight 1,000-yard season. Combined, the Packers had 298 yards rushing, which is 105 yards more than the Bears had on offense for the entire game. Throwing 2 touchdowns by John Staggers, who entering this game had never even had more than 1 touchdown in a season, and it was a good way for the Packers to close out what was an otherwise disappointing season and a massive step back from the 1972 campaign. So let me repeat the 3 games that the Packers had to close out the 1973 season. They had a game at home against the New Orleans Saints, a game at home against the Minnesota Vikings, and a game on the road against the Chicago Bears. And you're probably thinking to yourself, what could possibly be the problem? There's no glaring issues on the surface with that. If anything, that seems like an amazing schedule to end the season with. You get 2 of your final 3 games at home, so you get to play in front of your home fans and not worry about traveling and possible flight delays or cancellations in December when the season could matter most. Your 1 road game is well within driving distance. Over the final 3 weeks of the season, you're barely traveling. Your final 3 games are all against teams that missed the playoffs the previous year in 1972, and are all against teams that didn't even so much as have a winning record in 1972. Combined, the Saints, Vikings, and Bears went 15-27-2 in 1972, winning just 36% of their games combined, and with the Saints and Bears being last in their respective divisions. You expected the Vikings to be better for sure, but the Bears and Saints were still expected to be in the cellar, and you had 2 of your final 3 games against the presumed laughingstocks of the league. If someone showed me that schedule for the final 3 games, I would have gladly taken that, and I think most people would have too. Well, Green Bay Packers head coach Dan Devine did not like this. He did not like this schedule one bit. He had a few gripes with the schedule, oddly enough. He didn't like the fact that the Packers had to play 3 games in a 13-day stretch, as his team had to play a Monday game, followed by a Sunday game, followed by a Saturday game. Seems like an odd complaint, especially seeing his teams play 3 games in less than that when they have to play on Thanksgiving, and that doesn't seem too out of the ordinary, but okay. He felt that the schedule could have been more evenly distributed, as the Packers had a stretch where they did not play a single game at Lambeau Field during the month of October, playing 4 out of 5 games on the road, with the 1 game sandwich in between that being at Milwaukee County Stadium. You name it, he was complaining about something on the schedule. As he said, while we realize the difficulty in arranging a 26-team schedule, we are very disappointed in our assignment of home games for next season. Taking into account the problem posed by stadium availabilities, we still feel that we could have been assigned a more evenly distributed home schedule. And the thing that bugged him the most was the final 3-game stretch of the season, where his team had to play at home against the Saints, at home against the Vikings, and on the road against the Bears. Notice anything about those 3 games, with one of them being in Milwaukee, one being in Green Bay, and one being in Chicago? That's right, they're all in cold weather cities. And Dan Devine was livid that his team had to end the season playing 3 straight games outdoors in cold weather, saying, I kid you not, we are also disappointed in the number of late home dates and our finish in cold weather sites, but we will just have to overcome the scheduling adversity. And that would be a valid complaint, I suppose, if you were a Southern team and had to finish the season on the road with 3 straight cold weather games. But that seems a bit odd when, oh yeah, you play in freaking Green Bay! You're upset because your games are gonna be cold? No crap, they're gonna be cold! Your team literally plays in an outdoor stadium in a cold weather market. What the heck do you expect? That's like if the Saints, led by head coach Kellen Moore, had their final 3 games of the season in Atlanta against the Falcons, and then 2 games at home. And he complained because he hated how the final 3 games were in dome venues. Like, you literally play in a dome. What more do you want? You're literally complaining that you played 2 of your final 3 games at home. You're complaining about playing games in your home venue, not because of a scheduling conflict or anything like that, but just because it's your home venue. This is like complaining about existing. You're literally complaining that the Packers exist in Green Bay. If you're Dan Devine, your only option to avoid this, quite literally, your only option is to have your games on the road and to move out of Green Bay. I am fairly confident that you don't want to go on the road for the final 3 weeks of the season, and I'm also fairly confident that when you took the job with the Green Bay Packers, they still played in Green Bay and played at an outdoor stadium. One writer was also baffled at this criticism by Devine, saying, "Now wait a minute, Dan. Aren't the Packers supposed to be a good cold weather team? Aren't we the men of the North, used to the cold and ready to win in spite of it? But it doesn't matter if they're supposed to be good in the cold weather. Whether they're good or bad in cold weather is irrelevant when that is literally where your home is. Unless you just want them to play 0 games in the state of Wisconsin." How we went from the Packers winning the Ice Bowl in a game so cold that people got frostbite to a Packers coach complaining that his team had to play at home because it was too cold is quite the turn of events. And somehow, here we were. Here we freaking were. So here's a word to the wise to any coach of the Green Bay Packers going forward. Green Bay is in Wisconsin. Wisconsin gets very cold in the wintertime. Green Bay is a cold city. The Packers play in Green Bay and play in a stadium that is outdoors and unprotected from the elements. If you play a home game in Green Bay around that time of year, it is likely going to be cold. Therefore, if the NFL gives you a schedule where you play home games later in the year, you cannot complain that the league has it out for you by forcing you to play games in the cold weather when you are quite literally based in a cold weather city. Then again, based on everything else Dan Devine complained about during the schedule release more than half a century ago, he was just someone who liked to complain and whine about everything. There is a reason the man only made it to the playoffs once with the Packers, if that was his attitude on things. Because in 1973, Dan Devine, for some reason, thought that in more ways than one, the NFL was giving him the cold shoulder. Be sure to like and subscribe if you have not done so already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And check out my other channels, JG8 for the history of college football, JG7 for the history of baseball, and JG9 News, where we talk about all things happening in the NFL. Join me every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, where we'll play live NFL trivia for cash prizes. And make sure to join me live, as we're on stream just about every single day. And thanks to all our Patreon members and our YouTube members for helping out the channel. See how you become a member and show your support financially in the description down below.